boss were to call you up on Skype and ask you to do something, based on that voice recognition alone, are you more or less likely to do it? Now, in the last 20 minutes, I've shown you some slides where you can't believe what you read, you can't believe what you see, and now you can't believe what you hear. So these are pretty significant challenges that we all have to face. And our society is based, I think, for it to function in any valid form, it requires a foundation of trust that we can all agree on that we can do things. If you can't even trust the voice of your boss, there are some big challenges. I don't have answers to this, by the way, sorry. It gets a little bit better later on. So these emerging technologies are very interesting. But I want to spend the rest of the presentation talking about another emerging technology that I think is really interesting, and that's the rise of quantum information science. So quantum information science is a thesis of three of the pillars of the 20th century, which is computer science, information theory, and quantum physics. And it really promises a whole range of new capabilities around quantum sensors and quantum computers. The reason I want to spend longer on this one is because I think of all the other technologies I've described, if you've worked in the industry in IT or in cybersecurity, or if you've got any kind of STEM background, you've got a pretty good intuition about all of those technologies. We've seen enough Terminator movies to know what AI is, right? We know the cloud is just our data on somebody else's computer. We might not know the details of how AI works, but we kind of get it all. But quantum? That's something completely different. And in my experience, even seasoned IT professionals or cybersecurity people don't really have any natural understanding of how quantum technologies actually work. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on that today, just to see if we can sort of help navigate this emerging landscape. And there's another reason as well, which is I think we are about to hit the peak of inflated expectations for quantum technology, especially since Google made an announcement, or a paper from Google was leaked a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. So we saw that Forbes article with NASA cryptocurrency. It's actually very hard, if you're not an expert in this domain, to actually make sense of all this information that's being thrown at you. But all is not lost. I have found a source to help you navigate the weird world of quantum. It's called Quantum Bullshit Detection as a Service. Fantastic. I can't recommend this Twitter site. By the way, apologies for saying the BS word, but I'm Australian, so hopefully you'll forgive me. Yeah, apologies. So this is a very useful website. It's a Twitter feed, and basically what it does, it links to all of the popular articles on quantum technologies, and then very simply it labels them. It labels them BS or not BS. What an incredible service, and it's free. You don't even have to pay for this stuff. It's amazing. Do you know, I went through this and I found one really interesting point. Do you know Olivia Newton-John from Greece? Yeah? Did you know that her grandfather was a Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicist? I only know that because of this service. Incredible. All free. Amazing. Okay. So let's start by trying to ask, what is a quantum computer? And I should explain, apologies, I am not a physicist, so apologies to all the scientists and physicists in the room. You can come and tell me later what I got wrong. This is the definition I put together after a bit of reading. A quantum computer is a proposed new type of computer that seeks to exploit the properties of quantum mechanics, such as entanglement and superposition, to exponentially speed up computing performance for some hard problems. Well, what on earth does that mean? Well, I think there's three things you need to take away from this slide. Today, there are no quantum computers that can do anything useful. There are quantum computers in the world. They are toys. They can be useful for demonstrating certain theories, but there is no useful quantum computer on the planet today. Secondly, a quantum computer is not a faster version of today's classical computers. It is a difference in kind, not a difference in degree, because of the way it operates using quantum mechanics. And thirdly, a quantum computer may be useful for some very difficult problems, particularly mathematical optimization problems, but I don't think you're going to be writing your email on the Apple QC 2025. I don't think you probably won't even have an quantum computer at home. They will be there to complement classical computers that we use today. In fact, a quantum computer doesn't even give the correct answer. a quantum computer gives an answer that we hope is more likely to be correct than it is wrong. It's a probabilistic output, which is kind of really strange. Like I said, this stuff's spooky, does your head in. Actually, the best reference I found for quantum computing is a TED presentation from a guy called Scott Aaronson. He's a professor of computer science, I think Texas University or something. And he entitled his presentation, "What Quantum Computing Isn't: The Study of What We Can't Do with Computers We Don't Have." I love it. This is spot on. This is exactly what it is. Actually, he's a really funny guy, and it's a really interesting presentation. I really recommend it. So I have my own personal interpretation of quantum computing. I call it the Gwyneth Paltrow interpretation of quantum computing. This is mine. I made this one up. So have any of you seen this movie called Sliding Doors? It was a bit of a 1990s chick flick, but I'm a bit of a romantic at heart, to be honest, sort of nerdy romantic. So I really recommend this if you haven't seen it. It's a great film. Gwyneth's working in London, very happy. And then one day, out of a sudden, her boss comes in and fires her, out of the blue. So she runs home and she's in tears, and she gets on the subway, the train in London, and just as she's running to get on the train, the door is shut. And it's never quite clear, is she going to get on the train or is she going to miss it? And at that point, the movie splits into these parallel universes. And in one story, she makes it home, and do you know what? She finds her boyfriend in bed with another woman, the dirty rat. In another story, she never makes it home, and she doesn't find him, and she marries him, and that story doesn't end well. So I think this is actually useful because it actually represents what quantum physicists describe as the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics. It's mostly BS, to be honest, in terms of simple terms, but I think it gives us a useful intuition to help understand the power of quantum computers. And that is, in very simple terms, that conventional computers process one step at a time, whereas quantum computers have a degree of parallelism, and that is where they derive their power. So, for example, in a classical computer, we have a bit, which is going to be always a 1 or a 0. But in quantum computers, we have a qubit, which isn't 1 or 0. It's actually 1 and 0 at the same time, which is an effect of what's called quantum superposition. How do you make a qubit? Well, there are several ways that you can engineer a qubit. It's actually very, very difficult. You can engineer them in superconducting circuits that you have to keep close to absolute zero, so that's kind of inconvenient. Anyone got a fridge here at absolute zero? It's kind of tricky. You can build them in ion traps. You can also build them in industrial silicon by manipulating atoms one at a time. Now, in Australia, every year we have the Australian of the Year Award, which the Prime Minister announces in January. Now, sadly, I've never won it for contributions to crypto. Maybe next year, I don't know. But a couple of years ago, the winner was a professor called Michelle Simmons, who's from the University of New South Wales, and she's one of the world experts in building qubits from industrial silicon. So in Australia, we're taking this stuff seriously. Yeah, it's Australian of the Year. It was a physicist. So if you can take some qubits, how do you actually build a quantum computer from that? Well, what you need to do is basically scale up those qubits into very large numbers. Particularly, you have to make thousands or millions of them. You then need to be able to initialize them to some state. The problem with qubits is they're very fragile. You can think of them as a soap bubble. You can't really hold them. They interact with the environment. So the challenge of building many qubits is you want to keep them isolated from the environment, but you want them to interact with themselves. You want to put them in some initial state, and then at some point you measure them. And you hope that the measurement is more likely to be correct than wrong, because it's a probabilistic output. And then you use a classical computer to see if the output you've got is actually correct or not. That's the way it works. You don't just get oh, this is a correct answer. The answer's not 42. It might be right, it might be wrong. Now the challenge is that this is a very, very difficult process. There are many people who believe we will never actually be able to engineer a large-scale quantum computer that is useful. That's changed a bit in the last couple of weeks, interestingly. I'll talk about that in a minute. But there are also people who believe this is simply an engineering exercise, and it's inevitable that we will be able to do it in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Pick your time frame. As I said earlier, quantum computers are not science fiction. I'm sure many of you have seen the work that Google and IBM are doing in this space. Google has a quantum computer called Bristlecone, which is currently at 76 qubits. IBM has one online called IBM Q that's 20 qubits. So we are entering a very interesting time in history that has been coined the Niska Era. It rhymes with risk, NISC. This term was coined by John Preskill, who is a professor of quantum physics at Caltech in California. And he describes NISC like this. He says, we're about to enter an era where we will have noisy intermediate scale quantum computers. Noisy means that these quantum gates are very, very error prone. They're very subject to collapse or decohere in physics terms, and that will limit the scale at which we can build them. In fact, it's likely that for the next few years, we will only be able to build quantum computers between 50 and 100 qubits in size. And at some point, he says, we're going to see a quantum computer that is big enough to surpass the abilities of a classical digital computer. And that is called quantum supremacy. Now that sounds kind of spooky, doesn't it? Quantum supremacy, some sort of giant quantum robot. I am supreme, I am supreme. Actually, some of you may have seen the headlines. Even 2 weeks ago, a paper was leaked from Google claiming that Google has now achieved quantum supremacy. The paper was actually withdrawn. It is still available online. We believe it will be published by Google again soon. And that paper claimed that Google has actually achieved quantum supremacy. So quantum supremacy means that a quantum computer can do a particular type of computation, one that is particularly engineered in this fashion, in such a way that it would not be feasible by a classical computer, ever or in tens of thousands of years. This is mostly completely useless. You can't do anything useful. It's a completely artificial problem that has been engineered specifically to demonstrate quantum supremacy. But it is a significant milestone on the development of quantum computers. And many people are now saying that before quantum supremacy, people fell into two camps. Either the development of a large-scale quantum computer is really, really hard, or the development of a large-scale quantum computer is pretty much impossible. And the camps are kind of split between the two. But because we've announced, or because Google is promising to announce quantum supremacy, the lever has moved this way a bit, and now quantum computing is just really, really hard, not close to impossible. So I think the risk or the potential of a large-scale quantum computer has probably increased significantly in the last few weeks. But it's not going to change the world in the short term. So how does that impact cryptography? Well, I think probably everyone in this room now knows the basic facts that quantum computers are going to be good for many things, generating new materials, new drugs. But unfortunately, as luck would have it, damn, they happen to be very good at breaking or impacting cryptography. So in particular, there are a couple of quantum computing algorithms, one called Grover and one called Shor, that operate on different types of cryptography. So Grover's algorithm operates on symmetric cryptography, such as AES, or digest, such as SHAs. And that has the effect of halving the effective key size or halving the effective strength of a SHA hash. So that's not great. Suddenly our 256-bit AES key is only worth 128 bits. But to be honest, that's still good enough. That's still good enough. Shor is where the real problem lies. If we could build a large-scale quantum computer, that would essentially, at some point, break all of the mathematics that is used to provide us security in today's asymmetric cryptography, including RSA and elliptic curve. So what do we do about this? Don't worry. Don't panic. Don't panic. Don't panic. Let's have a look at where we are. To build a quantum computer of a large enough scale that would crack RSA 2048 today requires, according to a paper published by Google researchers this year, approximately 20 million qubits. Those numbers vary. People have different interpretations. That assumes a highly error-prone qubit for which, for every single logical qubit, you need multiple physical qubits. So for one actual logical qubit to do some work for you, you might need 1,000 physical qubits. It's 20 million, which is shown there on the right. Where we are today, we're up to about 50 to 100 qubits. And we're about to enter this Niska era, this noisy intermediate scale computing area, quantum computing area. So the question is, how long is it going to take from Niska to that? But the optimizations are happening in both directions. The algorithms are getting more efficient. We may generate new quantum computing algorithms, and that number is likely to come down as we make progress in this direction. And it's likely that at some point the two will meet, and then we've got a problem. So So how real is this threat? Well, if you did a sort of traditional risk matrix, you might come up with something like this. You might look at the time frame, short, medium, long, the impact, and the likelihood. And you might put a risk matrix that looks like this. Now, I did this. You might disagree with these values. But what struck me is there's no low risk outcome here. Even over the short term, the impact is so high that there is no low risk outcome. And we don't know what is happening in the labs of major countries around the world. We don't know what's happening at the NSA, we don't know what's happening in China, we don't know what's happening in UK, or at Google or indeed IBM. So we ignore this at our peril. And if you are a cybersecurity professional, what's our guiding mantra? Hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. So we have to do something about it. Luckily, we know that there's a couple of things already that we can do. So one approach is we can actually think about what's the primary use case of asymmetric cryptography. Well, of course, we sign things, we use it for digital signatures, but one of the principal use cases is to securely transport a symmetric key between two parties, as we do over TLS, for example. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get away from that key distribution problem using a completely different technology? And it turns out we might be able to. That's called quantum key distribution. You'll sometimes see this described as quantum cryptography, which I think is a terrible name. I really don't like that name. I think quantum key distribution, QKD, is much better. And basically, it takes a completely different approach to sending data from point A to point B. Instead of wrapping it, encrypting it with an asymmetric key, it actually takes advantages of the properties of quantum mechanics, and it embeds a key in a subatomic particle such as a photon. And it relies on strange quantum physics properties such as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which says you cannot observe information without modifying it. And therein lies the security of that approach. So there's a lot of work happening in this area. In Europe, they've just announced an open QKD Initiative. This is going to be, the vision for this is a network of secure QKD nodes all across Europe with local points of presence, local POPs, where you will be able to attach devices. That QKD POP will send you a key, and through the magic of QKD, it will pop out on the other side of the network, somewhere else in Europe, possibly somewhere else on the other side of the world eventually, and you will both have the same key and can conduct a transaction using that key without having to send it insecurely using asymmetric cryptography and hence prone to a quantum computer. So there's a lot of work happening, particularly in Europe. We are participating in this. The SafeNet HSEs have a QKD integration already. They have done for a number of years. And we partner with a Swiss QKD vendor called ID Quantique to do that. Some people are very skeptical about QKD, and they think it solves a problem that doesn't really need to be solved, because there's a much better way of doing it. And that is to actually design a new generation of algorithms that will be inherently quantum safe. And to do that, we basically need to throw away the maths of prime number factorization and discrete logarithm and basically rethink asymmetric cryptography in such a way that it will not be plausible to decrypt it using a quantum computer. And luckily, we already have some ideas of how to do that. But when you think about what we need from these algorithms, it's pretty daunting. We need all of these new mathematical algorithms to be secure, firstly, against all of the known classical attacks that we've known about for the last 30 years, which we've taken a long time to improve our asymmetric cryptography to be really secure against. Secondly, we need them to be secure against future quantum attacks with a computer that doesn't even yet exist. Kind of tricky, hey? I'm glad I'm not smart enough to be working on this, but luckily, this has been taken very seriously, as you'll be aware, in the cryptographic industry. NIST and the NSA are working on a new generation of algorithms. I went to the International Crypto Module Conference in Vancouver in March. It's fantastic. It's the ultimate nerd fest. It's absolutely brilliant, full of engineers, academics, people from NIST talking about cryptography. And they told us that by 2022, they will be publishing draft standards for a new generation of PKI. Now, that's not very long away. That's only 3 years. And then eventually, sometime in the future, those will become full standards. And then the US government will be required to adopt those protocols for US national security purposes, and the rest of the world will follow. So this stuff may happen pretty quickly. We are already seeing a hedging strategy in many vendors' products. So a hedging strategy says, we're we're kind of between two stools at the moment. We know we have classical encryption algorithms and we believe they're safe, but we know that there's a risk. And we know that these future algorithms aren't quite approved and ready. So what we'll do is we'll actually use both algorithms, multi-key certificates, and we'll sign information twice. We'll sign it once with a classical key and once with a possibly quantum safe key. And there are already certificate standards for doing this. You could have two certificates, one with a classic key, one with a quantum safe key. Or you can use X509v3 certificate extensions to support a quantum safe key in addition to a classical key. Or you can just concatenate the keys together. There are various ways that you can do it. And we will be bringing this capability to our HSE product family over the coming year as well, so that we can give customers a choice of using just classical or a hybrid between classical and quantum safe cryptography so that they can best protect themselves against these emerging threats. So there's a lot of information I'd recommend, a lot of websites I'd recommend if you want to get more information. That TED video is really good. John Preskill, he's recently done a fantastic webinar presentation that was recorded at Princeton or Caltech on NISC, noisy intermediate scale quantum computers. NIST has a lot of information. There's even, you can do free online courses on how to build a quantum computer if you want, from Coursera and edX. Great fun, really good. What else are you going to do at night? Watch Netflix? Come on, it's great. So to summarize, our advice to customers today is don't panic. It's all going to be okay. As far as we know, trust the maths, the encryption we use today is still growing strong. You should probably be more skeptical of implementations than actually weak algorithms. There's so many poorly engineered products out there. And don't trust us vendors. We might look like nice guys, but actually get some third-party assurance beyond what we say that our products are worth buying. And typically that's done through government independent certifications such as FIPS, Common Criteria, or UCAPL. But it's inevitable. Change is coming, so start thinking about this now. Don't put your head in the sand. I would encourage you to ask your vendors, are their cryptographic solutions going to be crypto agile in the future? Will they support hybrid, classical, quantum safe cryptography? And if they don't have a good answer for you, and if they're not even thinking about it, then maybe you need to go and find yourself a different vendor. We know that networks are evolving. We know that the security risks are changing. So I think we are moving through a continued rate of exponential change. And you need to ask yourself, is the security that you're investing in well matched to the underlying environment and to your assurance needs? Because things are moving very quickly. Thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you. Questions? Sure, I'm happy to take questions.
You kind of ran off there real quick, so...
I'm probably over time. Am I over time?
I think we have a few minutes. Any questions for Julian?
No, there you go. Answered all the questions.
There you go. It must have been really good.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Slide deck, will it be made available?
I'm very happy for it to be made available. I presume...
We'd appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Allison, we'll be able to make slide decks available? Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yes. Yep. We should have everyone's email, I believe, right? So,
Okay.
Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So our next speakers, we have two speakers next. The first one is Jim Walker. He's a federal CTO for UiPath, and John Lockwood, director for the Federal Intelligent Automation at KPMG. John's journey with RPA began when he was at Defense Logistics Agency. He was the RPA program manager, where he put in automations in production in 4 months, led to